In a small, tight-knit town where word traveled faster than the morning newspaper, there lived Mrs. Jenkins, a woman of simple means and unshakable faith. Though her life wasn't without its struggles, Mrs. Jenkins held firm to the belief that the Lord would provide, no matter the circumstance. One crisp autumn evening, after another long day of making do with what little she had left, Mrs. Jenkins decided it was time to call in a favor from above. She dialed up her favorite local Christian radio station, a regular part of her evening routine, and offered up a prayer on air. "Dear Lord," she said, her voice gentle but resolute, "you know what I need, and I trust you'll send it my way. I don't ask for much, just enough to get by." Across town, in a more modern, well-appointed home, sat Mr. Thompson, a man who prided himself on being the local skeptic. He'd overheard Mrs. Jenkins' prayer while flipping through the radio channels, and an idea struck him. If anyone could show that faith was just a game of chance, it would be him. Grinning, Mr. Thompson picked up the phone and called his secretary, Linda. "Linda," he said, barely suppressing a chuckle, "I want you to go out and buy as much food as you can fill up your car. Then deliver it all to Mrs. Jenkins' place. And when she asks who sent it, tell her it's from the devil." Linda, used to her boss's peculiar sense of humor, did as she was told. She loaded up her car with groceries, everything from basics like bread and milk to more luxurious items like fresh fruit and chocolate. When she pulled up to Mrs. Jenkins' modest home, she couldn't help but feel a bit of trepidation as she knocked on the door. Mrs. Jenkins opened the door and gasped at the sight before her. "Well, isn't this a sight for sore eyes?" she exclaimed, eyes wide with surprise. "Who could be so kind?" Linda, sticking to the script, replied, "Ma'am, this food is from the devil himself." For a moment, Mrs. Jenkins stood still, then a slow, thoughtful smile spread across her face. She began to take the bags inside, her steps deliberate and unhurried. After a few trips, she turned to Linda, who was still at the door, clearly expecting more of a reaction. "Well, isn't that something?" Mrs. Jenkins finally said, with a twinkle in her eye. "When the Lord orders groceries, even the devil makes deliveries." Linda, now a little unsure of herself, nodded politely and made her way back to the car. On her drive back, she couldn't shake the feeling that the joke had somehow backfired, though she wasn't quite sure how. When she returned to Mr. Thompson's office, she relayed the whole incident. Mr. Thompson, expecting a tale of bewilderment or even indignation, was instead met with Mrs. Jenkins' calm acceptance and subtle wit. He frowned, perplexed at how his little prank had turned into something that seemed almost divine. As the days went by, Mrs. Jenkins' story spread through the town like wildfire. Folks would ask her how she felt about receiving her blessings from such an unusual source, and she'd just give them that same slow smile and say, "Well, the good Lord works in mysterious ways. Sometimes his helpers just need a little extra nudge." And so, in the end, it wasn't just Mrs. Jenkins who had food on her table, it was also Mr. Thompson who found himself with a bit more food for thought than he had bargained for.